When Britain lost its American colonies, it also lost the place where it had been sending many of its convicts. So, in 1788, Britain sent 751 prisoners on a roughly 24,000-kilometer journey to New South Wales. On the far side of the world, on the continent we now call Australia, they were sent to build the colony that would become their prison. Some had stolen food or clothing. Some were political prisoners. Others maintained they had simply been blamed for crimes they did not commit. Over the next 80 years, more than 162,000 convicts would be transported here. This was not the beginning of Australia. Aboriginal civilization had existed here for tens of thousands of years, but it was the beginning of Britain's penal colony and a brutal chapter in the building of colonial Australia. In the next 10 minutes, I'll take you inside that history and tell you the extraordinary story of one of Australia's most famous prison breaks. Britain lost the American Revolutionary War, and with that, it also lost the place where it had been sending many of its convicts. But Britain's courts did not stop sentencing people. Jails became overcrowded, and old ships anchored in rivers were converted into filthy floating prisons known as hulks. Britain needed somewhere distant, somewhere prisoners could be sent, punished, and almost never return from. Its solution was New South Wales in Australia. In May 1787, 11 ships left Britain carrying around 750 convicts. After 8 months at sea, the first fleet arrived in 1788. But this land was not empty. Aboriginal peoples had lived here for tens of thousands of years. Britain claimed their country and established a penal colony at Sydney Cove. This was not like a modern prison. There was no massive wall around every convict. Most were not locked inside cells. They worked for the government or were assigned to settlers, building roads, bridges, farms, and public buildings. The colony itself was the sentence. The ocean was the wall. Returning to Britain was almost impossible. Beyond the settlement lay unfamiliar lands, harsh weather, hunger, and isolation. And the rules were relentless. Convicts worked long days, usually 6 days a week. Disobedience could mean leg irons, solitary confinement, or flogging. At first, the colony itself was the prison. But very quickly, Britain realized it also needed prisons inside the penal colony. In 1797, 2 early jails were built. One in Sydney, one in Parramatta. Both were rough timber buildings with thatched roofs. The Sydney jail had 22 cells and a separate building for debtors. It did not last long. It was destroyed by fire and later rebuilt in sandstone. Behind high walls, men and women were held in separate areas. The building had dormitories, cells for condemned prisoners, and an enclosed yard. But overcrowding became terrible. By the 1830s, officials reported that 110 male prisoners were packed into one room only about 9.75 meters by 6.7 meters. In another room, 40 women and 10 children were confined together. Executions also took place there. Hangings were carried out inside the jail grounds, and the public could watch from a nearby hill. This was not just a prison. It was a warning. Then came Hyde Park Barracks, opened in 1819. It was not a jail in the modern sense, but it housed around 600 male convicts under much stricter control. The men slept in hammocks, lined up in crowded dormitories. Each sleeping space was only about 2.1 meters long and 0.6 meters wide. Their daily routine was controlled from morning to night. Breakfast at daybreak, then work, road building, brick making, unloading ships, carrying supplies, public construction. Then back for food, inspection, and sleep. The food was basic: bread, meat when available, maize porridge, and a small ration of sugar. Enough to keep a working man alive, not enough to give him dignity. And if a prisoner broke the rules, punishment could be severe. He could be placed in irons, he could be flogged, he could be sent to a treadmill, or he could be locked in solitary confinement, sometimes in dark cells, surviving on bread and water. Over time, more prisons and punishment settlements were built: Parramatta, Norfolk Island, Port Arthur, Cockatoo Island, Darlinghurst, and Fremantle. Some were ordinary jails. Some were places of secondary punishment, where repeat offenders and difficult prisoners were sent. Port Arthur became especially feared, not just for physical punishment, but for silence, isolation, and psychological control. The system was expanding. Britain had not simply sent prisoners to Australia, it had started building an entire punishment machine. But inside this punishment machine, one prisoner became a legend. His name was Joseph Bolitho Johns. History remembers him by another name, Moondyne Joe. In 1848, in Wales, a police sergeant stopped Joe and another man at 2:30 in the morning. Their bags contained cheese, bacon, mutton, suet, and 3 loaves of bread. One loaf was already partly eaten. 2 days later, the same items were reported stolen from a nearby house. At his trial, Joe was sentenced to 10 years for larceny. He spent 4 years in British prisons before being transported to Western Australia in 1853. At first, he seemed to rebuild his life. He received a ticket of leave, worked in the colony, and was later conditionally pardoned. But in 1861, he was accused of stealing a horse near Tudye, and this is where the legend begins. While waiting for trial, Joe escaped from the lockup on the same horse he was accused of stealing. Even worse for the authorities, he took the local magistrate's brand new saddle and bridle. He was caught 2 days later. But the message was clear. Moondyne Joe was not an easy man to keep locked up. In 1865, he was sentenced again, this time to 10 years for killing an ox with the intention of stealing its carcass. Joe insisted to the end of his life that he was innocent. For him, this sentence was unbearable. So he escaped. Then he was caught. Then he tried again. Each escape brought harsher punishment, more prison time, more irons, more surveillance. Finally, the authorities at Fremantle Prison decided they had had enough. They placed him inside a specially reinforced cell. Stone walls lined with timber sleepers, fixed with more than 1,000 nails. A cell designed to be escape-proof. Governor John Hampden was reportedly so confident that he told Joe, "If you get out again, I'll forgive you." It sounded impossible. The cell was reinforced, the prison was guarded, the walls were thick. But the prison made one small mistake. It gave Moondyne Joe a pickaxe. Inside the sealed cell, Joe's health began to fail, so he was allowed out for exercise. But this was not freedom. His exercise was hard labor. Every day he was taken into the prison yard and ordered to break stones with a pickaxe. The guards watched him. The walls surrounded him. The prison believed there was nowhere he could go. But day after day, the broken rocks piled up near the wall. They were supposed to be removed. They were not. Slowly, the pile grew higher and higher, until it began to block the guard's view of Joe while he worked. And behind that pile of stones, Joe stopped simply breaking rocks. He started cutting through the prison wall. On March 7th, 1867, when the guards came to check on him, Moondyne Joe was gone. He had cut a hole through the wall, slipped into the superintendent's yard, passed through an unlocked door, and disappeared into the bush. The man inside the escape-proof cell had escaped, using the prison's own pickaxe. For almost 2 years, he remained free. Police searched for him, but Western Australia was vast, rough, and difficult to control. Joe knew the bush better than most of the men chasing him. But his freedom ended in the strangest way. In 1869, Joe broke into a wine cellar at Houghton's Vineyard. He hid there, waiting for his moment. And at almost the worst possible moment, the owner of the vineyard brought several police officers into the cellar for a drink. Joe tried to run. Instead, he ran straight into the police. Moondyne Joe was captured again. But the governor's old promise had not been forgotten. "If you get out again, I'll forgive you." After officials confirmed the promise, Joe was released on a ticket of leave in 1871. and by 1873, he was a free man. The escape-proof cell had failed, and Moondyne Joe became one of Australia's most famous prison escape stories. Moondyne Joe's story sounds almost funny today. A man in an escape-proof cell, a pile of rocks, a pickaxe, a hole in the wall. But behind the clever escape was a brutal system. For every prisoner who escaped, thousands did not. Some spent years in irons, some were flogged, some were locked in dark cells, some were sent to harsher punishment settlements like Norfolk Island or Port Arthur, where silence and isolation were used to break the mind, not just the body. And some never left the prison alive. Executions by hanging took place inside prison grounds. Crowds sometimes gathered to watch. Punishment was not only meant to control the prisoner, it was meant to warn everyone else. Transportation to Australia finally ended in 1868, but the buildings remained. The sandstone walls, the tiny cells, the punishment yards, and the old gallows became part of Australia's memory. Today, many of these places are museums. People walk through them, take photos, read the names of prisoners, and hear stories of escape. But these were not just tourist sites. They were places where people were controlled, punished, separated from their families, and often treated with extreme cruelty. Australia was not built only by free settlers and explorers. A large part of colonial Australia was built by convicts, people sent across the world, forced to work, and made to build the very system that imprisoned them. And that is why this history still matters. If you would like to hear more stories of prison breaks from Australian jails, or the story of how Aboriginal land was taken by the British, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit like and share it with your friends. If you enjoyed this, subscribe. I take complex ideas from the world around you and explain them in simple language. See you in the next one.